Welcome to our Rainbow Studio here as part of the YAHOWah blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. When we're in this Rainbow Studio, it's usually because we're going to address Twistianity, and we are going to continue in Volume 1 of Twistianity. We had gone into the 9th chapter of Daniel in our previous program, concluded the program, headed into the 27th statement, which is where it gets very provocative, because halfway through the 26th, there's the introduction of how a very influential, interesting person actually is going to convey Dowd's message to awaken people. It's one of those things in the 26th verse that you find most English translations trying to get Neged, which is the operative term, to be to represent their Messiah figure, and it doesn't represent their Messiah figure. Then the Neged isn't a messianic term. It is about a second or third in charge, not the sovereign, and it's somebody who reports to the sovereign. And so in 926, where it's used twice, once in a very positive context and one in what appears to be a negative context, it's actually the same person. And an English translation, they'll want to render at such that it's two very different people. One is their Messiah and the other is the Antichrist, when it doesn't apply to either. It is the individual who serves with Dowd, who's going to come into the fore to work on behalf of Israel against these negative forces. But the negative forces appear in the 27th statement, and that's where we're going to rejoin our presentation of AppallingTwistianity. And it reads, "And therefore, he will be an exceedingly influential person. He's going to vault himself into prominence by arrogantly confirming and imposing a treaty, a covenant agreement and arrangement with a great many, possibly even with the support of rabbis and the preponderance of people, especially the elitists, la ha rabim, including plenty of people, the preponderance perhaps of people, particularly in Israel, either for 1 week or based upon a single promise or during a particular Shabuw'ah. It's Echad, which means one, and Shabuw'ah. So Shabuw'ah can mean sevens, and it can mean a week, or it can be that this is going to happen on a particular Shabuw'ah. This is Daniel 9:27. So we go in and consider some of these words. So you have an egotistical person who is very arrogant, and he is going to be responsible for imposing a treaty agreement arrangement. Now, this is in context with Israel. This whole presentation has been focused on Israel. So it's a person who's going to impose a treaty that's affirmed by many on Israel. This is the two-state solution that has been touted worldwide. But the arrogant one who affirms it, we know to be Donald Trump, because the parallel of this passage is found in Yahowah 1 through 6. 7, Yahowah, Isaiah 17, 1 through 6. And there we are told that this treaty is going to be imposed right before the Shabuw'ah harvest. So the association with Shabuw'ah here, of course, is quite interesting. And while it could be for a week, which would mean if it's the Shabuw'ah that would be 7 years prior to Dowd's return as the Messiah on Yom Kippurim in 2033, that would make it the Shabuw'ah of the 22nd of May, 2026. But it just says Shabuw'ah, so it could be the Shabuw'ah of May 22nd, 2026, or June 11th of 2027. Either one of those two would work. This person is going to be Gabar. He will be triumph by imposing self-aggrandizing and overbearing tactics. You probably know who I'm talking about already. It's Donald Trump. And we know it to be Donald Trump for many reasons. One is that when you read the 7th and 8th chapters of Daniel, and you're being provided prophecy by Gabriel and Michael. Gabriel is Dowd, Michael is Yada. One of the things that you learn is that they're very descriptive on this individual, and they describe a person who is right now in the process of doing this. I mean, this Shabuw'ah harvest is either at the very earliest 6 months from now, 5 months from now, and at the very latest, some 17 months from now. So it has to be a person who's in a position to impose this on Israel at this time. There's no postponing this. I mean, this has to happen. If it's the Shabuw'ah of 2026, it has to happen in the next 5 months. If it is the Shabuw'ah of 2027, has to happen in the next 17 or 18 months. So it's an egotistical world leader who is in a position to impose it at this time. Well, that should be pretty much narrow the field down.
Totally narrows it down.
But then you turn to Yahowah 18, because Yahowah 18 describes the nation and the individual responsible for narrowing Israel at the waist, which is the same treaty that we're talking about here. And there are some 72 attributes, all of which are perfectly suited for the United States of America and Donald Trump, as are all of the descriptive factors used in Daniel, where he's a man that's very long in days. He's a really old guy. That he has goatish hair, comb over goatish hair. That'd be Donald Trump. In Ezekiel, we know that he is the copper confabulator that is measuring for grand edifices to be raised in his name. We're told that he is a sexual pervert. We're told that he is egotistical beyond measure, and that he has a propensity towards violence. And that by this time, he's even going to be in a wheelchair. But it also speaks of, not by the time of the treaty, but by the time that he arrives in Jerusalem to declare himself a god. It's clearly Donald Trump. There is no other option here. So that's who we're talking about. That's the time that we're talking about. And in other places in Daniel, it's very clear that he has 10 bonehead blowhards. So they're called Karine. So blowhards and boneheads that are going to support him, 3 of which he's going to trash in the process. But in that, my most recent book that's been published, at Sarah, which is Time of Trouble, the 9th volume of the Yada Yahowah series, I'm very clear as to who those 10 people will be. So this is what we're talking about here. This is what is being presented. And if it is for 1 week, then we would expect it to occur on Shabuw'ah of 2026, which would be, it's December now. And so we're talking about May. We got less than 6 months. If it is in 2027, which will be a little less than a week, but still on a Shabuw'ah, still meet this prophecy of 1 Shabuw'ah, then it would be 6 years and 3 months as opposed to 7 years and 4 months. But that's your window of opportunity here. And it's also one of those 2 would be the Towrah harvest. I have speculated and that it could be a combination of events where the affording of a terrorist state by Donald Trump inside of Israel occurs in 2026, and the harvest known for Shabuw'ah occurs on 2027, right at the time that Alaska flood 2.0 will transpire, and that will be so devastating for Israel. It's going to be 1,000 times worse than what happened on October 7th in 2023. So that harvest at that time would make a great deal of sense. Donald Trump has already written letters to state departments around the world saying that he doesn't want anybody making progress on a Fakistanian state, on a two-state solution, because it's the United States venue to do so. He's received well over $20 billion in bribes from United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to do this. He has taken Israel as a vassal, so that Israel now does precisely what Donald Trump says. You can see it all the time in the news. Donald Trump says you can do this, you can't do that. And so Donald Trump imposes his will over Israel. He's had Netanyahu at a dinner at the White House announced that, yes, that they would be recognizing a Palestinian state. Apart from Trump, he denies it. With Trump, he acknowledges it. And so when Trump took the money from Saudi Arabia and from Qatar and from United Arab Emirates, pledging that the United States would serve as the military for those countries, even if they went to war against Israel, such that Israel can never attack any one of those countries again. The realization is that Trump traded those bribes for a commitment to undermine Israel. So he's given Israel lots of lip service, but in the end, he sold all of those weapons to Israel to destroy Gaza, because he knows what I know, what I've known for a long time, that Israel was played to destroy Gaza. By destroying Gaza, Israel made itself totally dependent on Trump. Trump likes it when people are totally dependent on him. They're easier to betray that way. And so he gave them the weapons to hang themselves, and they did. So at this point, Israel has been completely abandoned by the world. When it goes before the Security Council and the United States will vote in favor of it, this is what's going to happen. The United States actually made the last proposal of what's going to happen in Gaza. It's told Israel that it needs to be responsible for clearing everything that they destroyed in Gaza. I mean, it will bankrupt Israel to do so. And that in Gaza, and this will also happen in the Fakistanian state, that countries like Turkey, which is committed to Israel's destruction, Egypt, Indonesia, Qatar, are all going to have armed troops in Gaza and in what will be called Palestine, all at the ready to destroy Israel. So this is what's going to happen. It's the initiation of the time of Israel's troubles. The prophets are extremely clear. I've written entire volumes about this. So the implication is that Satan's advocate, Donald Trump, will vault himself into prominence by convincing everyone in Israel. And this is what's amazing about Donald Trump. Well, I have known since November that Donald Trump was the person that Christians would call the Antichrist. He's the great betrayer, is the Torahless one. He's the one that's going to declare that he's God in Israel. That I've known this for certain. I have not been able to convince Israelites of it. Israelis post all the time on X and on Facebook, and none of them have been receptive to this. They adore Donald Trump. They refer to Donald Trump as a reincarnation of King Cyrus. So they believe that Donald Trump has their back, and that Donald Trump is their savior, and Donald Trump is great, and that Donald Trump could be prime minister of Israel. Well, the likelihood is he's going to be. He's finally going to give up on the United States. I don't think there'll be an election in 2028. If there is one, and Trump were to lose, he will retain power. He's not leaving the United States unless forced out some way, and an election won't do it. But that's 2028. It's not until 2030 that Donald Trump relocates to Israel. He locates during Ramadan in Israel. That's Ramadan of 2030. And then he makes his announcement that he is a God, and establishing the rules as a God. And he's not only demon possessed, he's actually possessed by Satan. on the Ides of March in 2030. So this is the timing events, and he's going to be accepted in Israel. They're actually going to believe that when he imposes, for example, the fake Estonian state, that he's got Israel's interest, that he will guarantee their protection. No, first of all, the United States couldn't guarantee anything. The United States is in a position where it wants to invade Venezuela. If it does, it will be its Waterloo. They went to war against the Houthis. It was going to be the war to end all wars. No one's ever going to bomb the Houthis like America bombed the Houthis. And the Houthis ran the U.S. Navy out of the region. The United States lost in a war to the Taliban. Yeah, the United States hasn't won a war since the war in the Pacific and World War II. We've lost every other war. We couldn't beat the Viet Cong. So, no, the United States can't guarantee Israel's security, and the United States is actually now pledged to defend Israel's enemies with its military. So it's amazing that Jews are going to believe him, but they will.
They love him. It's ridiculous.
They do. They love the man who is disastrous to them. I mean, they love their rabbis, and their rabbis have been the worst enemy of Jews for 2,000 years. So it's a lost nation. But anyway, that they are going to believe that he will achieve peace by breaking their nation into pieces and giving them to over to an Islamic State, with Israel retreating essentially to 1967 borders. And by the time the Muslims and the Jews were, the last time they were in this position, the Arabs schemed to destroy Israel, 1948, 1967, and 1973. So we're going right back to that position. If you want to know what the Muslims will do if they have a state that is abandoned by Israel, look at what they did in Gaza. It would take them 25 years to turn Gaza, which was essentially pasture land and groves of trees and that sort of thing, into a den of terrorists. This is where we are. The supposition, however, that is held by progressive Jews and also by the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, that it's going to be different this time is, of course, ludicrous. With Israel's now defenseless and vulnerable, peace now will rapidly devolve into a final and horrifying battle for the control of what remains. This is Satan's last-ditch effort to forestall Dowd's homecoming on Kippurim by exterminating Jews. With no one to turn to for support, the carnage is going to be considerable. 1 out of every 3 Jews, or 2 out of every 3 Jews actually, are going to die. And if not for Dowd's return to defend his people, all would be lost. God's going to actually intervene 10 days before Dowd returns, incinerating all of those who come against Israel, just as the world teeters on the brink of annihilation. Now, immediately after his fulfillment of Chag Matzah, Dowd turned his sights upon his people's adversary. For him, it will seem as if he went from one day to the next in terms of his earthly battles. Now, after giving Yisrael an extension on life and redeeming his people during Pesach and Matzah, Dowd became Yahweh's firstborn on Bikurim, tangibly showing the way home for those poised to be withdrawn during the Shabuw'ah harvest, which is upcoming. Then, with Dowd's homecoming, once Yahweh defends Yehudim, proclaimed through Teruah, he's going to arrive on Kippurim to bring an end to Israel's adversaries. Yahweh will repair the damage and restore the war-ravaged earth for Dowd to reign as king of Sukkah. We're returning to the conditions of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. That is the plan as presented by Gabriel, God's most capable and combative man, Dowd David, the very individual responsible for fulfilling it and achieving this result. It says here, but halfway through the week, he will stop the observance of the Shabbat. And seek to forestall the benefit of the sacrifice, which had been freely offered as a gift. Um, Halfway through is in 2030. It's the Ides of March when he makes his announcement. And so this is what is being presented. Although there's not going to be a resumption of these sacrifices, so that's would be a misunderstanding of the text. But what he is going to try to forestall is the ultimate sacrifice of the Adamah Parah at the end of all of this. By taking my life, he's going to do his best to end the benefit of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. The most extreme aspect of this vile and abhorrent action of repulsive religious idolatry will devastate, desolate, and incapacitate up to the very end, bringing destruction and annihilation along with the conclusion of the restoring witness. This is, again, focusing on what Satan, as he is manifest corporeally through Donald Trump, is going to try to achieve. So he's going to promise peace to Israel, saying that that he will and the United States will defend Israel if Israel sacrifices its heart to the Muslims who want to destroy Israel. Of course, it sounds stupid, but Israelis have done a lot of stupid things. I mean, destroying Gaza was really stupid because it turned the entire world against Israel, and it put Israel in a position where it's now got to clean up the mess. It's got to feed the people who want to kill them, and they have to accept armed Muslims to govern Gaza. It's their enemies. Was an exceedingly stupid thing to do. So here we know that Donald Trump is going to welch on his promises. Well,
Shocker.
Yeah, shocker. Rather than provide peace, it's going to be war. Rather than support Israel, he's going to do everything he can to destroy Israel because he's working for Satan. So this is the most extreme aspect of this. Is going to be abhorrent. It's going to be repulsive. It's going to be idolatrous. Trump is going to say that he is God. And it's going to happen on the Ides of March, March 15th, 2030. And it's going to be devastating. It's going to cause Israel to be largely depopulated. Up to the very end, it's going to bring destruction and annihilation. It's going to do this to the world, and then finally he's going to do it to Israel. And in the end, he wants to even stop the sacrifice of the restoring witness, which is Yada as Dowd's herald, on the day of the herald, when they have the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah that purges the mortal remnant of Israel. It will occur quickly and decisively with determination and decrees profusely poured out upon the deserted, desolated, and destroyed, who are astonished and stupefied, and who will perish because they are too stunned to respond. God is speaking of his people. I mean, Donald Trump is going to be devastating for the world. He is so mismanaged the war America started and using Ukraine as a proxy to break up Russia, such that no one knows what's going to happen other than the EU now and NATO seem convinced that their best option is to engage in a direct and all-out war with Russia, which at this point Russia will win. And it will lead to nuclear war. And it's unbelievably stupid because the very war that America started against Russia, and it's so well documented, it's amazing that the majority of Americans think that Russia is the instigator when it's America throughout this entire process, doing this for over 20 years. But the thing that was so stupid about George Bush, who initiated it, and then Lindsey Graham and John McCain, and later Obama, and even Bush, and I mean, not Bush, but Biden, and then we even had the State Department under Obama, and then Biden, and then Trump, all play into this. That the stupidity of it was that no one bothered to think that if they prevailed arming Ukraine and using Ukrainians as cannon fodder. And Ukrainians were easy to bribe, so that wouldn't be difficult. And they were fierce fighters. They were been vicious for a long time, and they are more Nazified than the Nazis were. They are incredibly anti-Semitic and ruthless. So bribing the Ukrainians was not a problem. The problem was the United States couldn't make enough weapons for them to use. The United States generals were fighting the wrong war, and the generals who were running the Ukraine proxy war with U.S. generals, they were inept, and that the calculus was they would bankrupt Russia, but in fact, they turned Russia into a military powerhouse. And Russia grossly outproduces the United States and the things that matter to prosecute a war, and are much better at it than NATO and the United States and the U.S. generals. But let's just pretend that it didn't happen that way. Let's pretend that the neocons were right, and that Russia would suffer, and that they would bankrupt Russia, and they would control Russia, and they would steal all of its assets, just like the United States is trying to do with Venezuela now. That was the whole idea. We'd steal all of the assets of Russia. That let's just pretend that would happen. Well, what do you think Russia's going to do if it's on the cusp of being destroyed and overrun by NATO and the United States?
They're going to nuke us.
They're going to nuke
all their enemies.
That is correct. They're going to nuke everybody. It's World War III. So there was no way to win. Winning was losing. Losing is losing. Winning is losing. Really, really stupid. But that's what we did. We put the world at the precipice of nuclear war. And now Trump is threatening to invade after now blockading Venezuela. You cannot blockade a country and not cause such chaos that it doesn't lead to war. And in this case, the principal backers of Venezuela, after all of the U.S. malfeasance, are China and Russia. The United States can't win economically against China, and it can't win militarily against Russia. Heck, the United States couldn't beat the Houthis. We couldn't beat the Taliban. And this is just going to get really nasty. So Trump has put the U.S. in an incredibly vulnerable position. And after all of that carnage, he's then going to retreat to Israel, the one country where he's popular, for reasons that you just say, oh my God, how do these people ever believe him? And I've been begging them to listen, to stop that. I'm writing personal letters to their most popular blogger saying, don't do this. Let me tell you what your prophet said. He is the great betrayer. Let me prove this to you, and go through all of his statements. And yet he's still popular. And Israel's just going to be desolated. And it says here, they're astonished and they're so stupefied, they're going to die. They're too stunned to respond.
That's what happens when you tell Yahowah to shut up and go away.
Well, they did that. That didn't work out well for them. And they
worked out.
Then they erased his name, and then they countervened everything that his beloved son, Dowd, the Messiah and King, our Savior, did for them. They countervened it all. Might as well spit in God's face. So on that sour Islamic note, we conclude the 9th chapter of Daniel. It is as bad ever gets. Although now the truth is evident. Dowd was speaking to us of his return to fulfill Chag Matzah, and then again on Yom Kippurim. And it is then that at least 10 days before it, on Teruah, that Yahowah will save his people from Christianity, Judaism, and especially from Islam, as well as from Marxists, from conspiratorialists as well, and from militias all around the world that wanted to globalize the Intifada. All those who have come against Jews during the final 7 years of the time of Jacob's troubles, which is likely going to commence on the 22nd of May, 2026, even if the harvest is the following year on June 11th. These are the dates. They're both Shabbats. I think we have to plan as if we have only between now and the 22nd of May of this coming year, and hope that we have a year past that to June 11th of 2027. And I think it's by design that I know when the two-state solution is going to be imposed and the time of trouble begins, but don't want to put saying it's the 22nd of May of 2026 or the 11th of June 2027, because I think that ambiguity actually serves us. We have to plan for one while we make certain we have the stamina and the resources and the devotion to get to the other, and we use one to warn Israel of what's impending. But while that is the design state for this condition, there is absolutely no question of the 23rd and 24th of September of 2033 being the fulfillment of Teruah, the final harvest, and the sacrifice of the Adam of Perah, and that Dowd is returning on the 2nd of October of 2033, and that we're returned to the garden on the 7th of October of that same year. We know those dates, and they are certain, and they're not flexible, not one iota. And we should be very glad that we are nearing that time, because it's going to get to be so grim that this positive result after so much hell is going to be exceedingly well welcomed. But what God's view has been is that without this stupefying loss, without this devastation to Israel and worldwide anti-Semitism and attack on Jews that we're witnessing now worldwide, that Jews will continue to be religious. They'll continue to trust in their politics. And while they're religious and while they're political, God can't do anything for them. They have to return to Yahowah, which means they have to recognize that their rabbis have not just failed them, they have misled them. And they need to understand that their politicians, like Netanyahu, have been incredibly destructive, playing into their demise rather than saving them. And it's only when they come to their senses and recognize what I'm sharing with you, and begin to embrace Yahweh's name again and accept what his beloved son Dowd has done for them, that there's any hope. So as we discovered when examining the adversary's playbook and Ezekiel is written from Satan's perspective. He is the Lord of Ezekiel. The heavenly scenes in Ezekiel are actually Babylonian and astrological. The feasts that replace Yahweh's are Do Nothing Day, New Moon Day, Feast of the Beast, which is cannibalistic. It's eating the flesh and drinking the blood of Satan's adversaries. So the third temple that's presented there is a gargantuan monstrosity is being laid out by the Copper Khan, who is Donald Trump. And it is so enormous, it paves over all of Jerusalem, not just the Temple Mount. Never going to be built, but nonetheless, it's Satan's wish list.
He's practicing on the East Wing.
He is practicing on the East Wing. Already lost an architect who said, what you're trying to build here dwarfs the White House. It's so out of scale. It's stupid. But, Trump likes out of scale stupid. He's egotistical beyond measure, and he's working for an egomaniac in Satan. Satan has a type. They're perfectly suited for one another. So for Satan to prevail in his quest to rise above Yahowah and Israel, he must negate what Dowd has achieved and force return. Satan's influence with Paul and with Shimon Peter in the creation of the New Testament, Imperial Rome, and the Roman Catholicism to follow that, to impose their toxic on the world. Well, Rabbi Akiba aided and abetted the fall of Israel, institutionalizing rabbinic Judaism to lead Jews away from the truth. And then, of course, Muhammad, whom through Allah, Satan ushered in the unmitigated anti-Semitism through Allahu Akbar, has managed to negate Dowd's sacrifice for the preponderance of people around the world. You've got now more than half the world's population that some, 4.5 billion people that are involved in religions that specifically deny Dowd of what he achieved and deny Yahweh's name, including Judaism, which exists to deny Yahweh's name and to write over the Torah. This is what the world has done to itself. We just finished the 7th Mizmor or Psalm upstairs in our Ocean studio, where Dowd wrote specifically of how Shaul, a Benjamite, would become his principal adversary and create such havoc around the world. But this is what's happened. And by Paul creating this myth of Jesus Christ by through identity theft, by creating a counterfeit of Dowd mixed in with heavy doses of Dionysus, Jews have been so misled and so turned off that they won't even acknowledge that Dowd served as the Messiah who was crucified in 33 CE. So this is Satan's attempt to forestall Dowd's return. And he either needs to persuade every remaining Jew to choose him over Yahowah, or he needs to kill them, such that there is no one left to reconcile. And you read Ezekiel's 25 ways to kill a Jew. So clearly it is, that's his preference. Satan hates people. That's why the Quran says that all Muslims have either already died killing for him, or they are committed and will die killing for him. It's total genocide. It's the hatred of people. So this is part of what is explained in Daniel 9:27, which is among the reasons that we shared it. But of course, the other reason was to prove that there was no justification for misappropriating Daniel 9 to create the false pretense that AntiChrist'u was a Messiah. And the very late and very odd readings of Matthew 16:13 through 20 and Mark 8:27 through 30, which were unattested until Eusebius in the 4th century, where he amalgamated and augmented the text of the New Testament to create this myth that there was a Jesus Christ, and that Jesus Christ was the founder of a church that was based upon the rock that was Peter. That line, which is put into both books, was written in the 4th century. Which is why it's not visible in any manuscript of the 69 or 70 that have been unearthed since of texts prior to Constantine and Eusebius. It's not found in any of them. It's Eusebius who wrote it. It's the great lie, and it was to capitalize on Daniel 9, which even Paul knew it didn't apply, which is why he didn't cite it. Paul would have stolen anything that wasn't nailed down, but he didn't try because he knew that it had nothing to do with his myth. So even stranger, both supplements conclude with an exceedingly bizarre result. You find them in the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, both written by Eusebius in the 4th century, and both conclude with giving orders. It says that he then gave the disciples orders that no one should ever say that he is the Christos.
Ooh.
So here you're, first of all, the whole thing is ludicrous anyway, because you're 3 years into this this alleged romance between the alleged disciples and the mythical Christ. There's 3 years into it, and they've never once had a discussion of who you are. There's no mention of a Christ. It's just, and Ayusu is not a Hebrew name, so there could not have been an Ayusu in Judea in the 1st century. And he could not have been a Christ because there was no discussion of who he was. They're 3 years hanging out together, the bros walking on water, being fishers of men, having parables and hanging out in under bridges and stuff, homeless. And they never once had a discussion of who they are. And finally, they have this alleged discussion, written, of course, in the 4th century, in front of what are called the gates of hell. Pan, the goat that Sadar that plays the flute, the gates of hell. They have this conversation at the gates of hell. This imaginary Jesus says, "So who do you say I am?" After 3.5 years. And then he says, "Well, the only way you would have known that is my Father in heaven has who, by the way, doesn't have a name. And I don't know how he could have a father in heaven when he's supposed to be the totality of God, according to Paul. So that doesn't make any sense either. And, well, by the way, God can't be a man, so that doesn't make any sense either. But nonetheless, they have this this discussion, and this 3 years into it, which means that the legendary myth of Ayusu never bothered to tell him who he was. So then he goes on, and his concluding comment to them right after he makes the statement is, "Don't you dare tell anybody that I'm the Christ. No, don't you say that." And now you have a religion that's called Christianity, and you have people called Christians, and he is all of a sudden magically Mr. Christ. I mean, it's just boggles the mind how ludicrous this whole thing is. And then after he's had that conversation, says, "Don't you dare, under any circumstance, or really bad stuff's going to happen," forbidding them that they should tell anyone that he was the Christ. He then looks back at Peter, who he just said, "Oh man, you're the guy, you're the rock, man. I'm going to build my church." Oh, by the way, there's no word anywhere close to church in the Greek text, not even close. It is it's a transliteration of the daughter of the Helios, and the Germanic religion church is who that is. Circular reasoning and all that sort of thing. So it's a pagan name, church, but the Greek word is ecclesia, and ecclesia doesn't transliterate to church, doesn't translate to church. It means to be called out. Ek, out, and ecclesia, to call. So there is no mention of a church in that discussion or any place else. So you got another problem with that. But then he turns to old Peter, who wasn't, by the way, Peter. He actually would have used, if he spoken, he would have used the Hebrew word kephesh for rock, but it's written in Greek, even though no one spoke Greek as part of that crowd, which is another problem. And Petra is the word for rock as opposed to kephesh in Hebrew. And so he becomes mythically Peter. And then what's the first thing that the mythical Jesus says? "Get behind me, Satan." Get behind me, Satan. So he's calling him demon possessed. Oh, this is really good.
And they still rally around.
Oh, and this is a religion of 2.5 billion people that are that stupid. Oh, so why did they allegedly do so against Christ's rebuke in his orders not to convey this errant opinion? And isn't calling oneself a Christian in direct violation of Mr. Christ's order? And this aside, isn't it suspicious that the line most responsible for turning Ayusu, who became Jesus in the 17th century, 1629, into the Christ and establishing the religion of Christianity and the church, isn't attested in any pre-Constantine 4th century codices of the Christian New Testament, with some 69 of them unearthed, and you can't find it in any of them. It first appears in the very text that Eusebius claims that Constantine asked him to write. And without it, the entire edifice of Christianity crumbles. It's dumb to be a Christian, folks. Now, there is also the realization that the earliest extant texts of the New Testament, after the elimination of the placeholders and those orchestrated by Eusebius, presented Christus, not Christos. It would actually have been a reasonably close Greek allegory to Messiah, not Messiah, but Messiah, which is fairly close to Messiah, but not exactly on the nose, because it's the che, not the hey, at the end, and it's and there is no ain in the middle of it, so it's spelled actually very differently. But there is some 10 different places a mention of a person named Messiah in the Torah and prophets, and so could it be a reasonable facsimile of that? Yes, but it wouldn't get you anywhere. So anyway, we do know that there is no mention of either an Ayusu or a Christu in any of the first, second, third, fourth, our early 4th century manuscripts, that it wouldn't be written out until the late 4th century. Otherwise, it was a combination of Chi-Rho, Chi-Rho Chi Sigma that was actually written out as placeholders. But that isn't to say that there isn't a textual affirmation for Christus, which means useful implement, if you will, because there is and all three depictions of the epithet used to describe the first followers of the way, would be the Ibanim, Acts 11:26 and 26:28, as well as in 1 Peter 4:16. The Codex Sinaiticus, orchestrated by Eusebius in the 4th century, reveals that its Christianos was penned initially, not Christianos. The same is true with the Codex Vaticanicus, also produced by the discretion of Eusebius under Constantine. Somewhere thereafter, in the late 4th centuries, when textual freedom led to wholesale alterations, Christuanios, meaning useful tool and upright servant, was replaced by Christianios, transliterated as Christian today, but literally meaning those who are drugged. If you are a Christian hearing this, please take some time, not only to verify the accuracy of this realization, which I can assure you is well researched and valid, but it should be enough to destroy your faith in the New Testament. But there's more. The Nestle Allen Greek New Testament 27th edition reveals that Christus was scribed in 1 Peter 2:3, not Christos. The references for this include Papyrus 72, which is a very late 3rd or early 4th century copy of the portions of Jude and 1st and 2nd Peter, and the Codex Sinaiticus, the oldest extant witness of Shimon Kephish's Peter's letter. In 1 Peter, which was attested by both manuscripts, the alleged disciple wrote, "As a newborn child, true to our real nature, be genuine." This is logikos, earnestly desiring and lovingly pursue the pure and unadulterated milk in order to grow in respect to salvation, since we have experienced the Lord, well, the Lord is Satan, so that's not good, from Kurios, as the useful implement and upright servant, Christus, not Christos, not Christ. 1 Peter 2:2-3, or Peter 2:2 and 3. With the realization that Christus was written in Codex Sinaiticus and in the placeholder for Chi-Rho Sigma, written in Papyrus 72 in the same place in this passage, we have another affirmation that the placeholder was based upon the Greek Christus and may have thus conveyed the meaning behind Messiah, which is very different than Messiah. However, the Alexandrian type on Papyrus 72 is very close to Codex Vaticanicus, and thus was likely scribed with the same order and at the same time by Eusebius, making it a product of the duplicitous one. Now, while there may be no merit to any of this, I am nonetheless motivated to share that the related Greek term Christos means kind, good, useful, benevolent, virtuous, and moral, as in the sense of being upright. Words directly related to Christos and Christus speak of integrity in the sense of being trustworthy and reliable, receiving the benefit of payment. But this then is not Messiah. This is not Christ. And Christ is based upon Chryso, which means to be drugged. So, writing about the great time of the Great Fire, the Romans that went through Rome during the time of Nero, circa 64 CE, the accredited Roman historian Tacitus, now the classical world's most authoritative voice regarding this time and place, in Annals 1544.2-8 wrote, "All efforts and prohibitions of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the fire was the result of an order, it was actually from Nero, but nevertheless, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christuanios by the populace. Christus, from which the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procreators, Pontius Pilate. Now, the fact is, at this time, these individuals would have been the Ibanim, which were Jews, and they spoke of Dowd being the Messiah. And they would have written, and they did write in Hebrew, and they spoke in Hebrew, and they were hated by the Romans, they were hated by the Greeks, they were even hated by the rabbis, and so that is who they were talking about here. Dowd was actually sacrificed as the lamb on Passover in 33 CE, and the Ibanim recognized him as such. They're the ones that Matthew plagiarized to create one of the only two places in Matthew that isn't plagiarized from Mark and Luke, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And the Ibanim are mentioned throughout the prophets, even by Dowd himself, as being very significant to the restoration of his reputation. Also, the Roman historian Suetonius, who lived from 69 to 122 CE, makes the reference to Christus in the lives of the 12 Caesars. A statement in Divus Claudius 25 reads, he expelled from Rome the Iudus Yehudim, so the Iudus, which would be the Yehudim Jews, constantly making disturbances at the instigation of Christus. So this Christus would be a reasonable translation of the Hebrew concept of being a useful servant. Dowd is called God's servant, his Ebed. So this would be what the Ibanim, as Jews, not as Christians, as Jews, would have said. And all this really does is affirm that the Ibanim did write in Hebrew, and they were Jews, Yahud, who recognized Dowd, and that is what was being referenced here.
And Paul wasn't killing Christians.
No.
Total fraud.
Yeah, since the Iudus constantly made disturbances and the instigation of the Christos. This event is dated by Suetonius to 49 CE. That is still the time that the Ibanim were the principal followers of Dowd as the actual Messiah who fulfilled Passover. And it's before Paul would write his first letter. So there was no mention of Iusu or a Christu until 52 CE. That is when Paul wrote his first letter. This was dated to 49. It precedes Paul, and Paul's book of the Galatians is the first book written about creating the myth of Iusu Christu. So the Ibanim text preceded Paul's, and this has to be referencing them because Paul wouldn't write until 52, and he was the first. The first two Gospels written were the Gospel according to Paul, but it's Mark and Luke. They were written in 75, 26 years after this. So the historian also wrote in Nero 16, Nero issued a public order calling for the punishment of the Christuanios in the year for the great fire of Rome due to the superstition associated with Christus, not Christ. Christus is, again, the good and useful servant. That's what Yahweh refers to Dowd all the time as his Ebed. So they used the term Dowd would have used because it was the term that the Eubanite heard Dowd use. These two more credible secular sources, in addition to Pliny, who used the same spelling, providing additional and convincing evidence in favor of Christus over Christos, the useful and merciful servant. That's Dowd, over the drugged one, which would be the myth of Jesus. So those, he said, and Christianios over, so those who are useful and merciful servants over those who are drugged. So the placeholders are errantly called Noma Sacra by theologians, which is Latin for sacred names. This moniker is wrong on 3 accounts. First, only 2 of the 10 placeholders that designate a name, while 7 convey titles. So it can't be name sacred, nomina sacra, because only 2 of them were names, and the other group of them were titles or just things. One represents a thing. In the case of the upright pole, it was Staros, and Staros became deified, and then became a crux under which the dead god of the stick was displayed. Second, there is nothing sacred in the company of God, only individuals and things which are set apart. The human term sacred is religious, meaning devoted to worship of a deity and a religious service and worthy of religious veneration. While the divine designation set apart is rational, it explains the association between Yahweh and the set apart to him, but not sacred. Third, at best, the Greek text would have been hearsay translations of Hebrew conversations. There's not a single book in the Christian New Testament that is a witness to the events that is chronicling. It's all hearsay. And everything that was spoken in and around the province of Yehuda would have been in Hebrew, and it's written in Greek, which was not spoken. So they're translations of hearsay. And even the Torah and prophets are translated into Greek and inaccurately. Therefore, adding the Latin nomina sacra designation is another step in the wrong direction. Christian scholars use the same hypocritical sleight of hand to explain the universal presence of the placeholders in the Greek text that rabbis have developed to justify the removal of Yahweh's name from the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. They suggest that the names were considered too sacred to write. But if that were true, if the earliest Christian scribes followed in rabbinical footsteps, believing that their 10 special names and titles were too sacred to write, why are they written today? Oops. If it was wrong then, it cannot be right now.
Stop using logic.
Oh,
They're blowing their brains.
I'm so sorry. Anyone who has spent 15 minutes reading any portion of the Torah, Nabi, from any one of the hundreds of Qumran manuscripts recognizes that too sacred to write notion is in complete discord with Yahweh's approach to every name and title in the Torah and prophets, including his own. They are never written with a sacred nomia. It's all rewritten out. Same 22 letters as every other word and name in Hebrew. Moreover, God, in the midst of criticizing and rebuking religious clerics, said, their plan is for my people to overlook, to forget, and to cease to properly value my personal and proper name by way of the revelations and communications which they recount to mankind, to their fellow countrymen and associates, just as when in a relationship with the Lord, Baal, Satan, their fathers overlooked, ignored, and forgot my personal and proper name. Yirmiyah, Jeremiah 23:27. That's it, man. You're done. Judaism, toast. Christianity, And God is saying here, circa 650, 700 BCE, that the scheme of Jews and the religious was to not only erase, not only to forget, not only to cease to value his personal and proper name, that was their entire scheme, which they have all done, making it a fulfilled prophecy. and that was not by accident. This was their plan, and that they would replace Yahweh's name with Baal, the Lord, Satan. I mean, who was it that Elijah opposed? It was the prophets of Baal. Baal is the Lord is Satan. And that they recounted these lies to their fellow countrymen and associates because they were in a relationship with Baal, the Lord, Satan, just as their fathers overlooked my personal and proper name. So that's devastating to Christianity and to Islam and to Judaism. If you're rational and you're informed, you would repudiate those religions. God just gave you every reason to repudiate the rabbis and Judaism, Christianity, and the popes, the priests, and the pastors, as well as Islam.
But they're not rational.
But they're not rational.
And they're ill-informed.
That's why we're so disgusted by the religious. You can spoon feed them truth that is devastating to their religious faith, that proves their religious faith is absolutely disingenuous and opposed to God, and they don't give a damn. We know that these clerical copy edits began much earlier because Yahweh is recorded in his Torah warning that the crime of diminishing the use of his name was punishable by death and separation. And Korah called out Leviticus 24, 9 through 16. Rabbis, however, took the opposite approach and said that the use of Yahweh's name was a crime punishable by death. That would be the opposite position, would it not? So the rabbis were here, Yahweh was here, they're absolute opposites. And Jews, almost universally, side with the rabbis over God. There's a word for that. Stupid. Why religious Jews replaced Yahweh's name with Adonai, my Lord, or Hashem is just utterly disgusting and brain dead. Doing so under the guise that the name was too sacred to say. The same myth, the sleight of hand that permeated through Christianity. Affirming this, the publishers in the preface of the popular English Bible translation, they openly admit that they replaced God's name with the Lord because of religious traditions. They're in essence admitting that rabbinical instigation provided them with a license to misrepresent, to replace, and to deceive. They edited Yahweh's name out of Yahweh's revelation and his testimony. Talk about having, I can't say that's having courage, having chutzpah. That's just incredibly disrespectful. It's appalling. By the way, and it's also unforgivable. Do you suppose that this was the same rabbinical mindset that was shared by the disciples who were allegedly reprimanded and rebuked for associating the Greek title Christos with Iousus, and then told to never convey the association that underpins the religion with anyone? And since this would have been the opposite approach pursued by God, who conveyed the Torah and prophets and Psalms, surely they could not have been speaking for him, right? They're conveying the opposite message. God never says when he talks about his Messiah, Dowd, or the Son of God, Dowd, or the returning king, Dowd, or his chosen one, Dowd, or the branch, Dowd, or the shepherd, Dowd, or our Savior, Dowd. Never say Dowd's name, or never say any one of his titles. In fact, he actually says the opposite in the 89th Mizmor. He says, if you don't avail yourselves of what he has said and done, I'm going to hold you accountable for it. And he even goes as far as to say that all of these things I've been saying about Dowd, that he is the sacrificial lamb, the Zeroah, that he is the Messiah, that he is my son, that I am his father, that he is the Savior, that his throne will be as brilliant as the sun in my presence, that he is Elyon, the very influence of God, and that he is returning with me. If all that doesn't come through, then you can call me a liar. So God's position on this is the opposite of the Jewish and Christian positions. They can't be right, even if God is wrong, because they claim to speak for that God. And because God is right, they are wrong. It's lose-lose. Now, it's curious, of course, that not one in 1,000 pastors, priests, religious teachers, or scholars ever mentions the universal application of the 10 placeholders found on every page of every manuscript written within 3 centuries of the fulfillment of Chag Matzah in year 4000 Yah 33C. Not one. And yet, if any portion of the Greek text was to be considered inspired by God, then these 10 placeholders would have been designed by God. And yet, it's as simple as that. And yet, ignoring them would then be in direct opposition to God's will if he intended them, and proof that he did not inspire the text if they were subject to our interpretation. I'm convinced that there is only one rational reason for Yahweh to write out his name 7,000 times in the Hebrew Torah, prophets, and Psalms. He wants us to know it and to know him by name. Yahweh's name, all of God's titles, convey essential truths in Hebrew, which are lost in translation and are discarded when replaced. The most positive spin that can be placed upon the Nomia Sacra is that the sounds produced by the 22 letters differ somewhat from the sounds presented by the 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. Of particular interest, there is no Y, W, or soft hey, or even SH sound in Greek. The letters which comprise Yahweh's, or if there was a Yosha, but there wasn't a Yosha. So if this had been the original basis for Iusus, and since names don't change from one language to another and always sound the same, there was simply no way to transliterate Yahweh's name precisely using the Greek alphabet. So rather than change his name or misrepresent it, the translators of the Septuagint began the tradition of using placeholders. Then New Testament scribes simply followed suit. Now, I'm not the first to recognize or bring your attention to this predicament, or first to deal with it. As I mentioned a moment ago, every extant 1st, 2nd century BCE and 1st and 2nd century CE copy of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew text of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, inserts Yahweh's name into the Greek text by using Paleo-Hebrew or Babylonian Hebrew letters. All of them. It was only after scribes were no longer conversant in Hebrew, that because they killed Romans killed every literate Jew at the time because, well, they were just mean that way, that the Greek placeholders were used to convey God's name. A prominent early manuscript scholar offered a different, albeit uninformed, comparison between the Greek placeholders and the presentation of God's name found in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, of which you should be aware. He claimed that the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Wah, He represented a contraction similar to what is found in the early Greek text. But if that were true, every single word in the Hebrew text would be a contraction. Said another way, Yahweh's name isn't written and using letters any different than any other word or name throughout the Torah. It's the same 22 letters. The 4 that are in Yahweh's name are all vowels, so they're the easiest to pronounce. And the reason that this isn't a problem is because the letters that comprise Yahweh's name are part of those 5 open mouth sounds or vowels, with the only ones being excluded being the Aleph and the Ain, representing the other 2. Using these vowels, every Hebrew name, title, and word is pronounceable. They were recording conversations, after all. So the inclusion of these placeholders tells a story, one undermined when Greek words, titles, and errant translations were substituted for them. If you were to read the Textus Receptus or more modern Nestle Allen, you wouldn't even know that these symbols ever existed. The same is true with every popular English translation. Potentially useful information pursuant to the credibility of the text and the religion was discarded in the process. Therefore, to the Christian, Yahweh's name was changed to Lord, and the mythical misnomer Iusus became Jesus. Well, that didn't happen until the 17th century. In the 3rd edition of the King Iam's Bible, And as for Christ, that's a can of worms all its own. The truth is, Lord is Satan's title. That is because the concept of Lord represents the adversary's agenda and ambition. He wants to lord over people, to control them, to own them. At best, Jesus is meaningless. At worst, it is the name of the savior of the Druid religion, which was Jesus, where the horned one is God. Now, recognizing that Constantine's initial share of the empire consisted of Britain, Gaul, and Spain, where the Druid religion flourished, the selection of Jesus could well have been politically expedient, and it was incorporated amongst virtually every pagan holiday and celebrated throughout the region. Worse still, as I have previously mentioned, Christos means drugged in Greek. In fact, it is from the rubbing on of medicinal ointments that the anointed concoction of Christos was originally derived. The RX rho chi symbolism associated with today's drugstores is a legacy of the first two letters in Christos. More you know, the worse it looks. All of this known after dedicating the time to properly critique Shaw's letters, Paul. I do not think that the scribes he employed to use the placeholders that they are now found in the manuscripts, that all of which were scribed in Egypt. So they may not even existed at the time that the oldest were written. But we do have a copy of Paul's letters in a 2nd century codex that is as early as anything in the New Testament, and they have the placeholders. So could well have existed that way, part of the scam. It would have been awkward in dictation, however, and would have served no purpose, of course, if he did not use them. It would be impossible for anyone to read his text if he had included them. So, and he's the one who introduced the name. He invented the name. So if he didn't use them, it would have been because the placeholders were found throughout the Septuagint, if that is how they emerged, and he was trying to copy the style of the Septuagint. He would have wanted his epistles to look like Scripture, and the Septuagint was considered that. So he may have just done that to pass off his letters as if they were genuine. Anyway, the mythical misnomer Ayusun was never, nobody that by that name ever lived in 1st century Yahudah, and it's certainly not a Hebrew name. It's not a name ever mentioned in prophecy. He just made it up. So, just as Saul changed his own name, jettisoning his Hebrew name, which means to question him, he most assuredly discarded the message conveyed by those purloined Hebrew titles and names. So it was just making it all up. However, Shaul, now Paulos, did not want anyone to realize any of this. As proof, he never once explained the meaning behind or pronunciation of God's name or his son's titles to his Greek and Roman audience. Never once. All of those titles have meaning associated with them. All of those names have meaning associated with them. He never once bothered to explain them. If he didn't bother to explain them, he didn't know them. As a result, in every translation of Galatians, I'm going to make the most reasonable and informed assumption that a scribe in Egypt harmonized Paulos' epistles with copies of the Septuagint, thereby adding the placeholders which were never intended by the scumbag that is Paul. Moreover, as a former rabbi, he would have been duty-bound to avoid all things Yah and Yahowah. As I contemplate their intent, I became convinced that the function of the placeholders evolved to the point that once they had served their function, they were eliminated. Originally, Hebrew letters written within Greek translations of the Torah were designed to properly attest to the fact that every name and title associated with Yahweh and his people were Hebrew, not Greek. But then when Greek proxies were substituted for the Hebrew letters, the nomina sacra, took on a divine connotation within the Greek nomenclature. It was this sense of divinity that gave the early Christian audiences employing the first scribes that they wanted to associate with their iousu, with their Christou, or their kurios and their theos, even their crux. So the noma sacra were deployed to give the new religion a godly veneer. Speaking of religious malfeasance, since Galatians is the principal text used to undermine the Torah's authority, and since it is cited to negate Dowd's repeated affirmations that he did not come to annul the Torah, but instead to fulfill it, it's important that we consider the troubadour of the Christian justification, which is the King James Bible, as well as the Latin Vulgate upon which this revision was ultimately based. Therefore, recognizing that the Greek text reads, Paulos, an apostle for or delegate, not separating men, not even by means of man, but to convey to the contrary and emphatically on behalf of iousu Christou and God, Father of the one having roused and awakened him for public debate, raising him out of a dead corpse. Here is the King James rendering of Galatians 1:1. Paul, an apostle, not of men, neither by man, but by Jesus Christ, and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. It reflects its source, the Latin Vulgate, which reads, Paulos, apostelos, not from men and not through man, but through Iesum Christum, and Deum, the Father who raised him from the dead. And that credulity is important. Here is how the most highly respected text, that of the Nestle-Aland Greek New Testament, 27th edition, with McReynolds English interlinear, reads, Paul, delegate, not from men, but not through man, but through Jesus Christ and God Father of the one having raised him from the dead. Sadly, the most recent rendition of Paulos's letter simply reiterated all of the same mistakes. Consider the New Living Translation's regurgitation of prior prose. This letter is from Paul, an apostle. I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father, who raised Jesus Christ from the dead. Now, you got some issues with this, just so that you know. First, he was not Paul, he was Shaul, so he changed his name. There is no reference anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms to an apostle. So therefore, that is not a divine title that Yahweh, God, would use. He was not appointed by any group of men or people. That is true. Not by any human authority. He claimed it of himself. He could not have been appointed by iousu Christou, Jesus Christ, because iousu Christou never existed. There was no person named iousu in the first century Judea, and Christ would have meant drugged. And in addition to all of that, Paul never once quoted anything from said iousu Christou, not a single word ever. How can you have been appointed on the authority of someone that you never quote? Not once. It is utterly ludicrous. Paul, rather than saying Jesus said, but I, Paul, say. So that is not possible, and Paul himself proves that point. And he could not have been appointed by God the Father because, well, first of all, he says that his iousu Christou was the totality of God, as if all God was in a man. So therefore, there could not have been another God someplace. And if you are actually representing Yahweh, you know his name, you use his name, and guess what? Yahweh would tell you all about that person speaking for him. When someone speaks for him, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of prophecies regarding their role. There isn't one of a Shaul Paul other than to say he is the plague of death, to condemn him. And since there was no Jesus, no one has ever been raised from the dead. That is not the purpose. Your body, when it dies, it is dead and gone. Goodbye. It is only, hello there, Kara. You are exuberant with your pearl leash. Nice to have you up here. That's the Wookiee Matt. Wookiee does the show here. The fact is, your soul, if you're in a relationship with Yahweh through the covenant by way of the Moed Mikre, then your soul continues to live. It is not raised from the dead because your soul does not die. Your body is diddly-eye dead, and it stays diddly-eye dead. It has no value to you whatsoever. So raising a body from the dead is ludicrous and counterproductive, and souls don't die that are associated with God. Therefore, he got all of this wrong. That's a good place for us to stop. Thank you very much for listening. Good day.